At my son's promotion celebration at the mountain lodge, he walked up carrying a folder and dropped it in front of me. "Sign it," he said. I opened it and froze. It was a document cutting all legal and family ties between us. I looked up and asked, "Is this really what you want?" He pointed at the signature line and shouted in front of 80 guests, "Sign it, you've been nothing but a parasite my whole life." The ballroom fell completely silent as every eye turned towards us. Snow had been falling since 3:00 in the morning. I knew because I'd been awake since 2:30, flat on my back in the dark, listening to it tick against the bedroom window, the way it does when the flakes are still fine and light. The real weight hadn't arrived yet. By the time I'd pulled on my work pants and laced up my boots at the kitchen table, the porch light threw its glow across a clean 5 in on the steps, with more dropping steady out of the black Colorado sky. Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge, the place where the quiet ones finally get their say. If this kind of story speaks to you, tap that subscribe button so the next one finds its way to you without you having to go looking. While you settle in, I'd love to know what's the weather like where you're sitting right now. There's something about a cold evening that makes a story, like this one, land a little differently. One more thing before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental. What matters is the truth underneath it. The name is Harwell Creed, 68 years old. November 14th, 2023, and I was threading my 2005 Chevy Silverado through streets that Ure had not yet woken up to claim a cup of coffee cooling untouched in the holder beside me. My father's old shovel riding in the bed behind. I rarely think about the destination on a morning like that. The truck just goes, and I let it. Bear Creek Summit Lodge anchors itself against the base of the San Juan Mountains, and before the sun has any say in the matter, it carries the same face it has always worn. Not a place you arrive at, so much as a thing that simply exists, pulled up from the rock and the snowpack, across decades unhurried, the way permanence works in this corner of Colorado. 380 acres, 38 guest cabins, a main lodge with 16 rooms, 2 restaurants and a ballroom that holds 200 people once you clear the furniture back. My father chose this ground when the rest of the world was happy to leave it alone. Everything standing on it now, I put there. The lot sat empty when I swung in, engine off, gloves on. I stepped out and the cold received me like a judgment, pressing through fabric and flesh, straight to the sternum. Morning Harwell. Walt Ingram was already there. Walt was always already there. 22 years he had been arriving before the light, and in every one of them I had never managed to beat him to the pavement. "Walt," I said. He came alongside me, shovel propped on his shoulder like a rifle. 55 years old, shaped by a lifetime of outdoor work, the way wood gets shaped by weather. Neither of us spoke again on the walk toward the entrance, and that required no explaining between us. Walt and I had exhausted the need for small talk somewhere around year 3. Front walk first, then the path out to the east cabins, then the long pull back to clear the drainage channel on the north face before water found a reason to sit and harden. The rhythm of it lived in my muscles, not my head. Push, redirect, step forward. I was 12 the first time my father explained snow. Not the way most people think about it: force it straight, fight the weight. His method was different angle, the load bring it to the side, let the physics do the work, rather than your back. I still run his voice in my head every time I grip the handle, still move the way he showed me. 650, a black SUV pulled wide into the far end of the lot. Not a blemish on it, fresh rubber, clean body, the kind of vehicle that has never seen a gravel road. I stood there and watched it, stopped, the door swung open, and my son emerged wearing a long wool coat with a leather messenger bag on his shoulder, crossing toward the lodge entrance with the unhurried stride of a man who considers a place already his. Landon never once glanced my way. He had made a practice of that for longer than I cared to calculate. "Hear about the new general manager," Walt said. Measured tone, no decoration. "That's my son," I said. Walt let that land without a response. He carved a load of snow off the path and pitched it into the drift heaped against the fence. "Big night ahead," he offered after a beat. "The promotion party." I kept my eyes on the drainage channel. 80 guests, full dinner service. A sound moved through Walt's chest, not a word, exactly more the shape of one. "You planning to go?" he asked. I reached into my coat pocket and drew out the ivory card with silver embossed lettering I had collected from my mailbox the night before. I held it so Walt could read what was printed beneath my name: Harwell Creed Maintenance Staff. He read it, Something tightened along his jaw. "I'll be there," I said, and slid it back into my pocket. "Get the ballroom sound system tested before 5. Full check. And whoever is on the board tonight, tell them the recording function stays on. Not for any reason does it get switched off." Walt regarded me for a moment with an expression I had seen from him maybe a dozen times across those 22 years. The expression that said he was reading between the lines and had elected not to ask what was written there. "All right," he said. We cleared the last of the North Channel and looped toward the cabin row. A pale gray was beginning to claim the sky above the ridgeline, the tentative gray of a sun that is working at it. My coffee back in the truck had gone cold hours ago. My shoulders carried their old ache, the one that arrives every winter and never fully departs, the one I had given up mentioning to anyone. Every structure visible from where I stood, I had razed. Before this night was out, someone intended to take it from me. 16 hours that envelope had been living in my coat pocket by the time I pushed through the front door that evening, and I was no closer to a decision about the party. Coat on the hook, boots off at the mat. Dottie was sitting at the kitchen table over a cup of tea she had stopped drinking, same as my coffee had gone cold that morning, set aside, suspended the way a drink gets when your thoughts have pulled you somewhere far from the room. She looked up as I came in, and her gaze moved directly to my coat pocket. Women's eyes do that when they already know the shape of what is coming. "They sent you a card," she said. Statement, not question. "Maintenance staff," I said. Dottie lowered her cup with a quiet, deliberate click and held her mouth still. Both hands rested flat against the table and did not move. After 39 years alongside her, I could read that particular stillness without any difficulty. She was sorting through several things she might say and had not yet committed to any of them. "Sit down, Harwell," she said. I sat. The kitchen held warmth and the scent of pine cleaner on the floors, and beneath, that something older and harder to name, the accumulated smell of our house in winter wood and heat, and the layered memory of every pot that had ever come off that stove since 1985. I framed this house the year after our wedding, built it weekend by weekend across 2 summers between shifts at the resort. My father was beside me the day we poured the foundation. "Tell me about Birch," Dottie said. I looked across at her. "You already know about Birch. What you've told me across 39 years, she said, that isn't the same as knowing. Tonight I want it from the start. Tomorrow, you walk into that ballroom, and before you do, I need to understand the full weight of what you are carrying." Her eyes held mine, brown and deeper at the center. The same eyes that had found me across a diner table in the spring of 1984 when she was 22 and I was 28, and the 4 decades waiting ahead of us were invisible and unimaginable. I closed my hands over hers where they lay on the table. "All right," I said, "from the beginning." My father, Birch Creed, arrived in Ouray in the winter of 1972, carrying $400 a used pickup, and no fixed plan, except that the alternator on his truck gave out. And the mechanic on Main Street had an honest face. First one he'd encountered in 3 states. That was reason enough to stop. He rented a room at the boarding house on Main Street. He hired on with the county road crew, clearing snow. Up at 4:30 every morning, working until dark, swallowed the last of the light. Come the spring of 74, he went walking on a stretch of land up above the ridgeline that nobody coveted, wrong aspect for ski runs, too isolated from the main road to tempt developers. He stood there a long while. Then he signed the papers. "How much?" Dottie asked. $3 they stay $800, I told her. He had to borrow the last $800 from that same mechanic. Had it paid back within 2 months. I arrived 4 years after that. Growing up, I understood that land was what our family had, instead of a pedigree not inherited, not gifted, but claimed by a man who had stared at something barren and ugly and recognized a future in it. He handed me a shovel at 7. At 16, he brought me up to the ridge on a hard January morning. Frozen ground beneath a foot of new snow, and he drew his arm wide across all of it. The unworked land, the stripped tree line, those far peaks burning white against a blue sky so sharp it hurt to look at. "What do you see?" he asked. I studied it. "Nothing much." "That's right." A slow nod, as though I had landed on something profound rather than simply the obvious. Everybody passing on that road below, they glance up here, they see nothing worth wanting. That is what keeps us safe. The moment this place starts to look like something that is exactly when people begin doing the arithmetic. You follow me? I did not follow him. Not at 16. I follow him. Now I said to Dottie. She pressed her hands tighter around mine. "Keep going. Birch died in the spring of 2002. He was 71 years old, and he went the way he had always said he wanted to, on his feet working. A heart attack took him on a Tuesday morning while he was walking the east perimeter of the property, checking the drainage the way he did every spring without fail. They found him sitting with his back against a pine tree, hands resting in his lap, face turned up toward the mountains. He left me the lodge, which by then had grown to 12 cabins and 40 employees, and the operating company I had incorporated 6 years earlier under the name Creed Mountain Holdings. The incorporation documents he left with Arden Quill, who had managed our legal affairs since 1990. He left a letter for Arden with very precise instructions about the probate process, which wrapped up in 2003 without a single challenge because there was nobody alive withstanding to mount one. And there was one other thing he left. He left Dottie a sealed envelope with her name on the front in his handwriting. No explanation. He had said to me, only give it to her after I'm gone. She'll know when to open it. I still have it, Dottie said. I looked at her. I never opened it, she said. Her voice dropped half a register, the way it did when something was costing her to say. 21 years, Harwell. It's sitting in the drawer beside the bed. I take it out sometimes and look at it. I always figured you would tell the children first. I thought I'd open it after that. After you finally told them. The words settled between us in that kitchen, with a weight that had been accumulating for a long time. I looked at my wife's hands beneath mine, the fine lines across her knuckles, her left thumb pressed quiet against my palm. I know, I said. Tomorrow, she said. Not a threat, not an accusation, just the word that signaled we had reached the end of the road we'd been traveling. Outside the kitchen window, the snow had started up again, soft and even, laying itself across the driveway and the yard, and everything my father had stared at when he stood on a bare ridge in 1973 and understood what no one else was capable of seeing. I sat there in the warmth with my wife's hands in mine and thought about the thing I had never said aloud to my son and about how long a silence can grow before it stops being protection and becomes something you can no longer name. Dottie went to bed at 11. I stayed on at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around an empty cup, in the particular kind of quiet that descends only when the house has gone to sleep and you are left sitting with everything you have been putting off. I had been putting this one off for a long time. The first time I truly understood what money could do to a person, not to the one who had it, but to the one who found out about it. I was 32 years old, in a bar on Main Street across a table from a man named Holt Kavanaugh. Holt and I had come up together in Ouray. Same school, same pickup football games in the dirt lot out behind the hardware store. Same poor judgment about certain things when we were young. He was the kind of friend you trust, without examining it, the way you trust a road you have driven so many times you stop thinking about the turns. I had never examined it once. That evening I told him the truth. Birch had been gone 3 years. The resort was running building momentum, starting to become something neither of us could have put a number to when we were boys in that dirt lot. I had a company worth more than anything we'd imagined back then. I gave him the figures. I told him because he was my oldest friend and the weight of carrying it alone had gotten heavy. Harwell, he said, lifting his glass. That is something else. 1 month later, Holt walked into my father's old study, my study by then, and lowered himself into the chair across the desk from me with a folded piece of paper in his hand. I want to buy the north parcel, he said. There's a developer out of Montrose who's interested. We split whatever comes out of it. I stared at him. Birch already told me he'd consider it, Holt said, before he passed. My father had been in the ground 3 years. He had never said any such thing to Holt or to anyone else. I knew that the way I knew the drainage patterns on the east slope, the way I knew the load tolerances of the main lodge roof without needing to think about it. I unfolded the paper, read the number he was offering for land that was worth 4 times as much, then folded it back up and slid it across the desk toward him. Get out of my office, Holt, I said, and don't come back. Something moved through his face that I couldn't quite read. Then he got up, picked up the paper, and left. I never spoke to him again. I sat in that study a long time after he walked out. There was a hollowness in my chest that had nothing to do with the money and everything to do with the 32 years I had believed I understood who Holt Kavanaugh was. That evening, I made myself a rule I have kept for 36 years. Nobody finds out what you have until you decide they need to know. Not friends, not neighbors, and God help me, not even family. Because the moment that number is out in the air itself changes, and what was there before is gone for good. I told myself I was shielding my children from that change. You were protecting yourself, I said out loud to the empty kitchen. My own voice surprised me. Admit it. I poured the cold coffee down the drain. I had made Dottie a promise the winter Landon turned 25. We were out on the porch in the cold, watching snow come down over the ridge, and I told her when Landon turns 30, I'll sit him down and tell him everything. Birch's land, the company, the numbers, all of it. Dottie had looked at me with those calm brown eyes and given one slow nod. Landon turned 30. I looked at my son across the Thanksgiving table and thought, not yet. He is still finding his footing. The next year he turned 35. I watched him at Christmas out in the driveway on his phone, laughing at something, and I thought he seems distracted. It will keep. He turned 38, and somewhere in the stretch between 30 and 38, the window I had been waiting on had quietly closed, and I hadn't noticed until it was already behind me. The one thing I had done was pay for his education. Landon was accepted to the MBA program at the University of Denver in 2008. He called me on a Friday evening, voice cracking with something between disbelief and joy. "Dad," he said. "Dad, I got in." "Good," I said. "I'm proud of you, son." I hung up, walked out the back door, stood in the yard in February cold, with the mountains going dark above the tree line, and let whatever was moving through my chest come all the way up until my eyes burned and my shoulders shook and I cried in the dark where there was no one to see me. The following Monday, I called Arden Quill and had him wire $140,000 directly to the University of Denver's Bursar office, paid in full. No name on the student account, just a third-party payment, which the IRS permits without gift tax consequences when made directly to an educational institution. Landon would see only that his balance had been cleared. He would not see the source. He never asked. I told myself that was humility on his part. Standing in that kitchen at midnight the night before everything, I finally admitted what it actually was. It was a son who had learned not to look too hard at things his father left unexplained. And I had taught him that. Every year I waited, I gave him another lesson in it. The snow was still coming down beyond the window. Somewhere up the ridge, Bear Creek Summit Lodge sat dark and quiet, waiting for tomorrow evening, the way a stage waits before the lights go up. I rinsed my cup, killed the kitchen light, and climbed the stairs to lie awake beside my sleeping wife and think about all the roads I had chosen to walk away from. The person who let Holt Kavanaugh close enough to see the picture clearly, that was me. I had told myself for 36 years that I would never repeat that mistake, that I would never again let the wrong person near enough to understand what was at stake. What I had not reckoned on was that the door could be opened from the inside by someone I loved, who had no idea what he was letting through. Landon called on a Wednesday in October 4.5 years ago. Something in his voice was brighter than it had been in a while. "Dad, I want to bring someone home for Thanksgiving," he said. "Her name is Selah. Her family's from Denver. I think you're going to like her." Dottie looked at me from across the kitchen after I put the phone down. Her eyebrows lifted a quarter inch. "He sounds like himself," she said. "The old version." "He does." I agreed. Thanksgiving that year was warm for November. The snow held off. The sky was that hard, bright blue you get after a cold. Front pushes through and takes the clouds with it. Landon arrived Wednesday evening with Selah Breck, riding in the passenger seat of a rental car considerably nicer than anything my son had ever driven on his own. Selah was 32, blonde, carrying the kind of polish that does not come from a beauty school, but from being raised in a home where how you present yourself is treated as a matter of character. She took my hand with a firm grip, held my eye, and said she was glad to meet me. Her manners were good. She was also within the first 20 minutes conducting a quiet survey of my house. I was watching her eyes, and her eyes were moving across the kitchen cabinets, the age of the appliances. The single-pane windows I had been meaning to swap out since 2014. Dottie caught it too. I knew by the way she set down the dish towel a half-beat too carefully. Selah's parents showed up Thursday morning. Her father, Clifford Breck, stepped out of a Lincoln Navigator with Colorado plates, wearing a vest over a flannel shirt, the way men dress when they want to read, as casual and can't quite close the gap. He was 60 at the time, broad across the shoulders, silver-haired with a handshake engineered over decades to communicate something specific about the man delivering it. "Clifford Breck," he said, holding my grip. "Great to finally meet you, Harwell. Landon talks about you." Something shifted in his face when he said my name. Just a fraction, a slight settling, the look of a man who has just confirmed a thing he wasn't entirely sure of. I stored it without knowing yet what I was storing it for. Willebrecht came around from the passenger side. Warm smile, a casserole dish tucked under one arm, covered in foil, the kind of woman who walks into someone else's house for the first time and immediately wants to know how she can help. Dottie took to her right away. I could see it. Dinner was good. Landon was at ease in a way I hadn't seen from him around me in longer than I could place shoulders loose, reaching across the table to refill Sela's water glass before she thought to ask. I watched my son and tried to hold on to that. Tried not to let myself track the other things I was picking up on. Clifford asked about the resort 3 times. Never bluntly smoothly the way a man works when he's both making conversation and gathering data. You've been out at Bear Creek Summit Lodge a long time, Harwell, the first time. Beautiful piece of property up there. You know the ownership group at all second time. Landon tells me you've been running maintenance operations out there for years. Must know every inch of the place. Third time? Each time I answered simply, yes, a long time. Not personally, no, I do know it well. Each time Clifford nodded and steered the conversation somewhere else. After dinner, Landon and Clifford carried their coffee to the front porch. Alma, who had come up from Montrose for the holiday, came and stood beside me at the kitchen window. We watched the two of them through the glass. Clifford leaning on the porch railing, talking with his hands. Landon nodding with his whole body the way younger men do, when they found someone whose confidence feels like a compass bearing. Dad, Alma said, keeping it quiet. I don't like him. Clifford, he asked me 3 questions about you tonight, she said. About you specifically, not the family, just you. She wrapped both hands around her mug and her knuckles went white. It felt like a background check. I looked at my daughter. She had her mother's eyes and her grandfather's instincts, and in 33 years, she had not once been wrong about a person in any way that counted. I'll keep an eye on it, I said. Alma made a sound that told me she had already moved past keeping an eye on it and was somewhere further along, but she let it go. Later that night, after the Brecks had left for their hotel, and Landon was asleep in his old room, Dottie came and found me in the kitchen. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table. Clifford Breck looked at this house, she said, the way a man looks at something he is working out how to acquire. My chest tightened the way it does when someone says out loud what you have been thinking privately. I know, I said. He knows who you are, Harwell. Her voice was quiet and certain. I don't know how, but he knows. I sat with that. Outside, the first snow of the season had started, soft, tentative flakes dissolving the instant they met the warm ground. I'll call Arden tomorrow, I said. Dottie gave one nod and went to bed. I stayed at the table watching the snow that wasn't sticking, yet thinking about the expression on Clifford Breck's face the first time he said my name. That settling, that confirmation. He had known exactly whose hand he was shaking. The question that kept me at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning was simple and had no good answer. What did he intend to do with that knowledge? Arden Quill called me the Monday after Thanksgiving. I did some digging on Clifford Breck, he said. Background, business history, public records. The man has been general manager at 3 different resort properties across the past 20 years. None of them ended well for the people who owned them, Arden said. 2 sold under pressure. 1 went into receivership. He paused. He is good at what he does. Harwell, I just want you to understand what it is he does. I thanked him, put the phone down, and stood at my office window, staring at the mountain for a long time. Then I did nothing, because Landon was happy in a way I hadn't seen in years, and I told myself that happiness deserved room to breathe before I brought a lawyer into it. That was the first mistake of that particular season. It was not the last. The following Thanksgiving. 3 years ago now, Landon came home alone. Sela was with her family in Ouray. He pulled in late afternoon, quieter than usual, carrying the specific kind of distraction that means a man's mind is somewhere his body hasn't caught up to yet. The 4 of us ate at the kitchen table, Dottie, Landon, Alma, who had driven up from Montrose again, and me. Callum was in Portland. Bryn was in Denver, finishing her last semester. Neither could make it. After dinner, Landon and I found ourselves on the back porch in the cold, the way we sometimes did. The sky had gone clear, and the stars above the San Juans were the kind that make you feel small in a way that isn't entirely unpleasant. Dad, Landon said, I want you to know something. I want you to be able to rest. You've worked your whole life, and I think it's time you let yourself take it easier. My chest pulled tight. I studied my son's profile against the dark sky, the line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders. Things I had watched change since he was 8 years old, standing in the snow with his hands going white. I'm fine, son, I said. I know you're fine. He turned to look at me. I'm in a position now where I can help carry some of this. You don't have to hold it all alone anymore. I looked at him for a moment. He meant it. Whatever else was wound up in what was coming in that moment on that porch, my son meant every word. I know, I said. Thank you, Landon. He nodded. We went inside. That was the last real conversation we had. After the holiday, Alma pulled me aside before she headed back to Montrose. We stood by her car in the driveway, her breath making small clouds in the cold, her hands buried in her coat pockets. Dad, I need to tell you something Landon said to me 2 years ago. Her jaw was tight the way it gets when something has been sitting in her chest too long. We were at a bar in Denver. He'd had a few drinks. He looked at me and said, she stopped, pressed her lips together. He said, Alma, Dad likes you more than me, because you go out and shovel with him, and I won't. He thinks I'm lazy, and he's never going to say it, but I know. Something dropped through the center of my chest. I told him that was ridiculous. Alma said, her voice rough at the edges. I told him you didn't think that, but he wasn't listening. He just kept saying you always looked at him differently. She pulled one hand from her pocket and pressed it flat against her sternum, like she was holding something in. Dad, I think that's where it started. Not Clifford, not Sella, just that. I stood in the driveway after Alma's taillights vanished around the bend. That cold worked its way through my jacket and found my ribs, and I did not try to stop it. My son had carried for years the belief that I thought less of him because he never reached for a shovel. Not once had I opened my mouth to tell him otherwise. Christmas that same year, Bryn made the drive up from Denver. 29 years old, the baby of the family built out of her mother's bluntness, and a gift for asking the question everybody else had carefully avoided. We were at the sink after dinner, just the two of us, Dottie and Landon, somewhere in the other room. Dad, Bryn said, elbow deep in a pot, not lifting her eyes. Mind if I ask you something strange? Ask it. Is there something you've been keeping from us? A quick glance at me, then back to the scrubbing. Not anything medical, just something. I've had this sense for a while that there's a door somewhere in this house I've never once been allowed through. Something locked up in my throat. I reached over and killed the water. Bryn, you don't have to push on this. She set the pot aside, wiped her hands, and turned to face me. Eyes level, her mother's eyes exactly carrying that fraction of too much perception. I just wanted you to know I see it. I'm just a man who likes being out in the snow, I said. She studied me for 3 long seconds. Then a smile crossed her face, not genuine, the kind that means she's filing this away for later, and she went to find her mother. I stood there at that sink, holding the towel, turning over in my mind the room she'd described, the one with the locked door. I had constructed those walls panel by panel, year by year, every question left unanswered, another board nailed in place. My youngest daughter had come and knocked, and I had stood on the other side and told her the room didn't exist. Snow started falling again once the evening settled in. I stood at the kitchen window, watching it come down, and turned over what Alma had said to me in the driveway, the bar in Denver, the drinks, the comment about the shovel. Somewhere along the road of trying to protect my kids from what wealth does to people, I had allowed my silence to do something a good deal worse. Spring ran late getting to Ouray that year. Arden Quill's second call came in the second week of March. Not the kind of call a lawyer makes when he's passing along routine information, the other kind. The one where every word has been weighed before it leaves his mouth, because what he's found is serious. Harwell, he said, this needs to happen in my office. Not a phone conversation. Come in. I was in his office in Ouray the next morning. Arden had handled my legal affairs for 33 years. 61 years old, lean, a little gray at the temples, with the calm of a man who had long since figured out that speed is no substitute for precision. The place smelled of old paper and coffee, same as it always had. He let me get settled. Then he opened a folder, rotated it across the desk so it faced me. Someone has quietly been pulling apart the ownership structure of Creed Mountain Holdings, he said. Not a government action, private research hired out. Public records, some attempts to get at filings through back channels. He laid a finger on the top page. Traces to a Denver law firm. The firm's client is Clifford Breck. Something hardened along my jaw. I had seen something like this coming. I had not pictured it being this methodical. How long has this been going on, I asked. 8 months that I can pin down, possibly further back than that. Arden laced his hands together on the desk. There is a document already drafted by Breck's attorney Harwell. A transfer agreement. Your signature line is there waiting. The date is blank. The room around me was very still. Somewhere outside, meltwater was dripping off the edge of the roof in a slow, patient rhythm. 8 months he's had that thing sitting ready. 6 months at minimum, Arden said. This was not a decision made in haste. This was built. I sat back and let myself think about Clifford Breck at my Thanksgiving table 4 years ago. Those 3 smooth questions, the quiet confirming shift in his expression. The first time my name came out of his mouth, the way his gaze had moved through my house like a man taking inventory. He had understood exactly who I was from the moment he walked up my front steps. And he had spent 4 years building toward what came next. There's more, Arden said, and drew out a second sheet. Breck has been in contact with the Denver real estate investment group Summit Ridge Capital Group. He's handed them operational data on Bear Creek Summit Lodge, occupancy figures, revenue infrastructure assessments. Arden held my eyes. He presented all of it as though he had authority to speak for the property. He does not. He's been trying to sell my resort, I said. He put his name on a preliminary letter of intent with Summit Ridge Capital Group. 6 weeks ago, Arden said, under Colorado law, that is a breach of his fiduciary duty as general manager. His obligation of loyalty runs to Creed Mountain Holdings, not to his own interests. It also opens him to civil liability for tortious interference with business relations. If Summit Ridge Capital Group acted on that LOI in any substantive way, the damages would be considerable. I turned that over for a moment. 8 months of preparation. A transfer document already bearing my name. A letter of intent delivered to a Denver investment group. Clifford Breck had not merely been scheming to take what I'd built. He had been arranging to sell it out from under me before I could even say no. What's your direction on this? Arden asked. I want to hold off, I said. Arden's face stayed where it was, but something moved behind it. Harwell, hear me out. You have grounds to void his contract right now, he said. Measured. You have grounds to go after him in court. None of that requires you to wait. I need to understand where Landon stands in all of this, I said. The words came out smaller than I'd planned. I need to know whether my son stepped into this knowingly or whether Clifford led him into it blind. I looked at Arden straight. Because one of those things is a betrayal and the other one isn't, and I won't respond to them the same way before I know which I'm dealing with. Arden held that for a moment, then one nod. I'll stay on it, he said. The second any of this accelerates, you pick up the phone, day or night. There's one more thing, I said. From inside my coat, I drew out the small notebook I'd been carrying since my father's funeral, cover worn through, pages gone soft. I found the 2018 entry open to it and laid it face up on the desk. The handwriting was mine. The number was $40 million. Beneath it, one line, not Birch's land to sell, not mine either. Belongs to Alray, Arden read it, raised his eyes. Clifford never had any knowledge of the 2018 offer, I said. If he had, it would have told him something he needed to understand. I lifted the notebook off the desk and put it away. This property was never on any table. Not for Summit Ridge Capital Group. Not for anyone alive. The man who is convinced he's about to transfer it to a Denver investment firm is going to learn that in a room with 80 witnesses. I got to my feet, did up my coat, and stepped out into the March air. Behind me, I could hear Arden reaching for his phone. 3 weeks out from that meeting, Landon rang me on a Tuesday morning. I was on the east cabin loop working a broken gate latch back onto its post. The phone went off in my pocket. I stripped off one glove, looked at the screen. Landon. I put the latch down in the snow and picked up. Dad. Something in his voice opened a door, warm lit from within. The voice of a boy who used to phone from college just to fill 20 minutes, talking about whatever crossed his mind. Dad, I've got news. Something big. Tell me, I said. Clifford offered me the general manager position at Bear Creek Summit Lodge. The words tumbled out one over the next, falling the way they used to when he was young, and something good had happened that he still couldn't quite get his arms around. Full GM package, salary, benefits, oversight of all 3 divisions. Dad, this is what I've been pointing myself at. I stood out there in the snow, with the broken latch lying at my feet, and let my son's excitement come down the line and settle into my chest, right next to everything else, already sitting there. That's a large responsibility, I said. I know it is. But Clifford says I'm ready. He's had 2 years to watch how I operate, and he says the instincts are there. Landon's voice dropped a register. I wanted you to be the first one I told. I'm glad you called, I said. Are you proud of me, Dad? That question hit with 4 decades of weight stacked behind it. The man asking it from the other end of the line was the same boy who'd stood in the snow at 8 years old, hands going white, too stubborn to go inside. I'm always proud of you, I said. Always have been. The sound he made wasn't quite a word. He ended the call shortly after that. I stood out there in the cold cell phone in my hand for a long moment before I slid it into my pocket, pulled my glove back on, and went to work on the gate latch. There was something Landon didn't know, couldn't have known, which was that 6 months before that conversation, I'd been the one to pick up the phone and call Clifford Breck, a Sunday in November. 2 days after that first Thanksgiving, at the Breck place where I'd sat and watched Clifford work through his 3 careful questions and run his eyes over my property like a man taking inventory. I made that call before Arden ever turned up the drafted transfer agreement, before I'd seen the whole picture of what Clifford was assembling. The reason I called was simpler than any of that. Landon had been drifting for years, slipping further out of reach, and I'd run out of ways to get through to him with words alone. So I fell back on the one thing I knew how to offer, a real chance at something. That's what I said to Clifford. Give him something with weight to it, real responsibility, a chance to prove what he was capable of. Clifford didn't pause, didn't hedge, agreed right away. But then he would. I was the man who employed him. Saying no wasn't a real option, not to me. What I couldn't see at the time, what I was blind to entirely, was that Clifford had already worked out how to use Landon inside his scheme. My phone call hadn't planted the idea. It had just handed him exactly what he needed, grip end first. I got the gate secured, made my way back to the maintenance shed. Walt Ingram was at the bench inside, drawing a blade across a stone in long, steady strokes, the scraping sound tight in that small space. Landon got the GM position, I said. Walt put the blade down and turned to look at me. Clifford offered it. Yes. Walt's lips went flat. You going to tell him? Not yet. He picked the blade back up, went back to work. You know where this road leads if you let it go too long? Not accusation, just the plain truth of it. I know, I said. The morning Landon took over as general manager, I came in the same way I always did. Pulled into the maintenance lot at 7, collected my shovel, worked the front walk, the east path, the drainage channel. At 9:00 sharp, a black SUV rolled into the main guest lot. Landon climbed out wearing a navy wool overcoat, the kind that runs more money than I'd put toward clothes in a full year. He stood at the lodge entrance and tipped his head back to take in the building, the look of a man who'd arrived somewhere he felt he was owed. He never once glanced toward where I was standing. I watched him from across the lot with my shovel, and something passed through my chest that I couldn't put a clean word to. Pride and grief so tangled up in each other, they'd lost their separate edges. No telling where one stopped and the other began. That afternoon, Selah came out for a walkthrough. Landon took her through the main lodge, the restaurant, the event ballroom. I was down in the utility corridor sorting out a supply line fitting. They came past the open doorway, and Selah looked in, caught me on my knees with a wrench, and said to Landon, no quieter than ordinary conversation. Is that the maintenance man your father knows? Landon looked in. Our eyes connected for maybe a half second before his slid away. That's my dad, he said. Selah kept moving, didn't miss a step. She spoke in the way that signals the subject has been filed away and won't be revisited. I went back to the fitting. My hands held steady enough. My jaw was a different story. Walt showed up in the corridor 10 minutes on coffee in hand and extended it toward me without a word attached. I took it, stood there, and drank half of it in the dim corridor while the tap of Selah's heels faded down the hallway overhead. Later that evening, Callum rang from Portland to congratulate his brother. When that call was done, he rang me. Hey, Dad. That careful tone in his voice, the one he used when he was handling something delicate. I heard about Landon. That's great for him. It is, I said. He let a beat go by. Dad, can I ask you something? Go ahead. 3 years back, I put in for an operations coordinator position at Bear Creek Summit Lodge. Never got a response. Not even a note saying no. Another pause. Did you know? My throat clamped shut so fast it was almost painful. I found out after the fact I said, choosing my words. I'm sorry, Callum. That should never have gone that way. He was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said at last, in the register. That meant it was anything but okay, though he wasn't going to press on it. Okay, I love you, Dad. I love you too, son. I hung up and sat behind the wheel in the driveway without moving for a long time. The mountains had disappeared into the dark. Up on the ridge, the resort lights glowed warm and amber against the sky. One son was running a piece of land he had no idea was his father's. Another had been edged out of a shot at something by his own brother, and had gone 3 years without understanding why. My youngest daughter had stood at the kitchen sink and put a question to me, and I'd smiled and said, There wasn't any space. I sat there in the dark with the engine off and came to understand that what I had built to shelter my children had spent years being used to keep them apart from each other. It was 11:30 before I went upstairs. The house held the kind of silence that settles over Ouray on a November night, once the snow has quit falling and the cold has taken full hold, nothing stirring outside, not a breath of wind. I hung up, my coat worked off my boots, turned toward the stairs. The kitchen light burned behind me. Dottie was sitting at the table. There on the wood surface, the one she'd scrubbed clean, probably 10,000 times going back to 1985, sat a small envelope ivory and faintly yellowed at the edges. Birch Creed written across the front in my father's hand, that careful, deliberate print belonging to a man who'd learned to write on his own as an adult and never quite shed the watchfulness that came with it. The envelope had been opened. I stood in the doorway and looked at my wife, 65 years old, and she still carried the same straight back she'd had at 22. But something was different in her shoulders tonight. Not collapsed, not broken settled. The way a person's body goes when they've finally done the thing they've been circling around for years. "You opened it," I said. 21 years, Harwell. Her voice didn't waver, but underneath it there was something that had been hauled a very long way. I decided it was time. I crossed to the table and took the chair across from her. She pushed the envelope over to me. I reached inside and unfolded a single sheet of paper. My father's script was thinner than I remembered. Shakier the penmanship of a man who was already sick when he put the words down. "Dottie, you are the one who keeps this family on its feet. 19 years. I've watched you do it, and I want you to know that I see it even in the times when Harwell can't find the words to say so. He loves you the way men built, like us, tend to love, fully and mostly, without speaking it aloud, and that is a shortcoming. I'm sorry to have handed down to my son. I have one thing to ask of you. When the moment arrives and you'll recognize it, don't let him stall any longer. He will always turn up a reason to put it off. He stalled on the land. He stalled on the resort. Every hard conversation he's ever faced, he found a way to let it sit. That's the shape of him. You're the only one who can tell him the waiting's done. The envelope belongs to you. Read it when you're ready, or don't ever. But if there's ever a moment you need the go-ahead to push him here, it is. Birch." I laid the letter flat on the table. The kitchen had grown very small, very warm. Beyond the glass, the mountains were gone in the dark. Only shapes I knew to expect. "He knew you," I said. The words came out rougher than I'd meant them to. "He knew both of us," Dottie said. Her hand came across the table and covered mine. Not a gentle gesture, a firm one, the grip of a woman who had already made her choice. "Harwell, I need to put a question to you, and I need a straight answer. All right? Did you have any knowledge of what Clifford's been up to before tonight?" I looked at her face, the lines beside her eyes, the set of her jaw. "Since March," I said. Something shifted in her expression. Not anger exactly, something heavier than anger, a worn-out kind of recognition. 8 months, she said. "I needed to find out whether Landon, I understand why you held back." She pressed her hand down harder over mine. "Harwell, Landon walked into that man's plan with either his eyes wide open or his eyes wide shut. Waiting those 8 months didn't settle which one it was. It just gave Clifford 8 more months to work with. That landed somewhere behind my ribs." "You're right," I said. "I know I'm right." She drew her hand back and folded both of them on the table. "So, tomorrow you are going to walk into that room, and you are going to be every inch of what Birch built and what you built on top of it. And you are not going to sit there and let that man put a pen in your son's hand and watch him sign away the thing your father pulled from frozen ground." I looked at my wife for a long moment. 39 years. That diner booth in 85. Every winter since. "Arden is in town," I said. "He's been sitting in the parking lot since 6:00 this evening." Dottie's chin lifted a fraction. "Good. I told Walt to keep the sound system going. Full record." "Good. I'm not going to sign anything. I know you're not." She rose from the table, picked up the letter, and folded it back into the envelope with the careful hands of someone returning a fragile thing to its proper place. "Come to bed, Harwell. You need to sleep." I watched her move toward the hallway. At the doorway she stopped, didn't turn around. "He would have been proud of you," she said. "Birch not for what you built. For the fact that you still go out every morning and do the work yourself." A pause. "That was always what he was proudest of." She went upstairs. I sat alone at the table for another few minutes, palms flat against the wood, looking at the spot where the envelope had been. Then I shut off the kitchen light and followed her up. Sleep didn't come. I lay in the dark beside Daddy and listened to her breathing go slow and even, and I stared at the ceiling and thought about my father's handwriting on a piece of paper that had spent 21 years in a drawer holding its moment in reserve. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, I gave up pretending and just lay still with my eyes open, letting the thoughts run without trying to manage them. At 4 I got up. I dressed in the dark work pants thermal undershirt. The heavy flannel I'd had so long, the cuffs had gone ragged at the edges. I carried my boots downstairs and pulled them on in the kitchen so I wouldn't wake Dottie, shrugged on my coat, reached beside the back door for the thing I always reach for, Birch's shovel, ash handle iron blade, the slight leftward lean, in its balance worn in by 40 years of hands. The most familiar object I owned, more familiar than anything else I had ever picked up. I pushed out into the morning. The cold met me the way it always does, in Ure in November, not easing in, but arriving all at once like dropping into cold water. The thermometer on the porch rail read 9 degrees. The sky was that deep black that exists only between 3 and 5 in the morning, before even a hint of gray begins to show at the mountain edges. A fresh 3 in had come down overnight. The driveway lay in a clean, unmarked sheet of white. I started at the top of the walk and moved down toward the road. Push and lift and redirect. The same motion my father had put in my hands when I was 7, standing in this same cold, in this same dark on land. He was only beginning to understand, was going to become something. In the stillness, I heard his voice the way I sometimes do, when it's very cold and very dark and there's nobody else around. Don't push the snow, Harwell. Lead it. There's a difference. I stopped working for a moment, just stood there in the dark with the shovel handle gripped in both hands and the cold pressing against my face, and let the memory of that voice be as real as it was ever going to get. Landon had never learned to shovel properly. He pushed straight ahead, the way people do when nobody's shown them different, and the snow folded back on him, and he'd get frustrated and quit. I tried to teach him once he was maybe 12, and he looked at me with that expression 12-year-olds get when they've already decided the lesson isn't worth their time. I let it go. I always let things go with Landon when I should have held my position and pushed through the friction. The full shape of a man's life tends to show up in the small things if you know how to read them. I finished the front walk, moved to the side path, then the steps to the back deck where the snow always piled deep in the north corner. The labor warmed me from the inside out, the way physical work does. A heat that rises in the shoulders, spreads down through the arms and chest, and settles into something close to quiet. I was wrapping up the back steps when the kitchen light blinked on. A minute later, the door swung open and Dottie came out in her heavy coat and the wool hat with ear flaps she'd owned since the early 90s and refused to throw away on the grounds that it still worked fine. She was carrying 2 mugs. She crossed the deck and extended one without a word. I took it. The coffee was hot enough to feel through my gloves. We stood together on the back deck in the dark at 5 in the morning, facing the mountains we couldn't see but knew were there. The way you know the presence of people who've been close to you so long that you feel them even when they're out of sight. I was wrong to wait, I said. My breath hung in the cold air. Not just the 8 months, all of it. Landon should have known what he was walking into that resort to manage. He should have known years before this. Yes, Dottie said. She didn't soften it. She never did. If I hadn't told him I stopped, then started over. If I had sat down with him the way I promised when he was 30, none of this would have been possible for Clifford to run. He'd have had nothing to work with, maybe Dottie said. Or maybe Landon would have found some other road toward who he's been becoming. You don't know. She wrapped both hands around her mug. What you know is tonight. I looked at the dark shapes of the mountains against the slightly paler darkness of the sky. I'm not afraid of tonight, I said. I know you're not. She turned to look at me, her face barely readable in the light spilling from the kitchen window. Are you afraid of Landon? The question needed a moment to settle. I'm afraid of looking at him, I said, and not finding the boy who stood in the snow, with his hands going white. My throat tightened around the words. That's what I'm afraid of, not losing the resort, losing the version of him I've been carrying. Dottie reached over and rested her free hand on my arm, just laid it there, heavy and warm. You might lose it, she said quietly. That version might already be gone, but tonight is where you find out what's left. And whatever's left, that's what you work with. We finished the coffee and went back inside. I showered and changed into the clothes I'd set out the night before. Not a suit I didn't own one that fit anymore, Dark slacks, a button, shirt, the good boots I kept for occasions that called for them. Dottie straightened my collar at the hallway mirror, the way she'd straightened it before every significant moment we'd faced together. "Ready?" she said. I reached into my coat pocket. The small notebook was there. I could feel the worn cover under my fingers. "Yes," I said. I held the back door open for her. We walked to the truck together through the snow I'd cleared in the pre-dawn dark, leaving 2 sets of prints across the fresh white surface. I started the engine. The heater took its time. The drive to Bear Creek Summit Lodge ran 11 minutes. I had made it 10,000 times. Tonight it felt like the first time, and the last time collapsed into the same 11 minutes. Out of habit, I pulled into the maintenance lot. Cut the engine. Through the windshield, the main lodge burned gold against the November dark, warm and full and beautiful. The way something is beautiful when you built it yourself, and you know every scar that lies beneath the surface. I sat a moment with my hands resting in my lap. Then I stepped out of the truck and walked toward the light. The first thing that caught my eye when I entered the ballroom was the flowers. White arrangements on every table, tall and full, the kind that cost enough to signal that someone meant business at an event like this. They were beautiful. They were also, after 30 years of running this property, clearly not from our regular supplier. Someone had brought them in from outside, someone wanting to put their own stamp on the room. Clifford Breck had been redecorating my ballroom. Dottie took my arm as we came through the entrance. 3/4 of the seats were already taken. 80 people in their finest circling tables, the low collective hum of a crowd that senses it's gathered for something that counts. Warm light, the chandelier dialed back to an amber that flattered faces and blurred the carpetware along the east wall I'd been putting off since last spring. Every fixture my choice, every wire behind every wall, something I knew by memory. They'd put us near the back. I took note of it, said nothing, and pulled out Dottie's chair. "Back row for maintenance crew," she murmured as she sat. "Best sightlines in the room," I said. Walt Ingram was already positioned 3 tables over, pressed dark suit, the crease still sharp, like he'd ironed it an hour ago. Across all that space his eyes found mine, and he gave me one small nod. The kind a man gives when the job is done, and he's waiting for the rest to unfold. The soundboard was live. Everything set. Good. Old habit took over, as I moved my gaze around the room, not the way a guest looks, the way an owner does. Tabletops level, service corridor clear of anything a heel could catch. East wall, exit unblocked. 22 years of Walt's hand in every surface that gleamed, every fitting that ran without a sound. Mayor Lorinda Foss held court at the VIP table up front. Dark blazer, the practiced look of a politician who has spent years training herself to appear engaged even when she isn't. 2 terms in office. I'd made it to exactly 1 civic event in all that time, and she'd thanked me by name for backing the winter employment program, not realizing who she was talking to. I'd let it stay that way. Closest to the stage, a young man early 30s had a camera bag stowed beneath his chair, and a reporter's notebook lying open beside his plate. Bowden Chaffee. I'd been reading his name in the Ouray Plainsman for 4 years. Solid work. Careful balance, the kind of reporter who didn't run a story until he was sure of it. Clifford had brought him in to cover Landon's promotion. He was going to file a different piece than he'd planned. Clifford was moving through the crowd with the well-worn ease of someone who had built a career on making people feel singled out. A handshake here, a grip on the shoulder, there a laugh released at precisely the right beat. The room bent it around him, and if you didn't know what you were watching, you'd have put him down as the man in charge. Landon stood near the front with Sella beside him, taking in congratulations with the bright, slightly off-balance look of a man who hasn't quite convinced himself yet that this is happening. He looked good. He looked happy. For a beat, he looked the way he had when he used to call me from college for no particular reason. My chest went tight and I breathed through it deliberately. "He looks like himself tonight," Dottie said quiet right beside me. She'd caught it too. The good version, I said, the same phrase she'd used 4 years back that first Thanksgiving at the Breck house. Then Sella tilted up and said something into Landon's ear, and he pulled himself straighter, and what had been open and unguarded became composed, managed the general manager back in place where the sun had just been. Bryn materialized at my elbow. She'd made the drive from Denver and carried the look of someone who'd come straight from the office, neat professional, but her eyes were doing something else entirely, scanning the room with her mother's instincts. "Dad," she said close to my ear. "The way Clifford keeps glancing over here, I don't like it." "I know," I said. Every few minutes, a look this way and then away just a beat too quick, her mouth pressed flat, like he's keeping tabs on something. He is, I said. Bryn held my gaze a moment, then very low. You're ready for whatever this turns into tonight, aren't you? Not really a question. Have you been in touch with your brother? I asked her. Something shifted in her face. It was complicated grief and irritation wound together. He doesn't reach out much, she said. When he does, it's the resort what he's building, what he's moving on. Never asks about the rest of us. Her eyes crossed the room to where Landon stood. That's not how he used to be. I know, I said. Alma came in 5 minutes on and dropped into the chair on Dottie's far side. She reached past her mother and gripped my hand once firm, pointed wordless. She'd driven 3 hours up from Montrose, and her jaw carried the look of a woman who'd settled something in her own mind somewhere along the highway. Clifford Breck stepped to the stage at precisely 7:00. The room went quiet the way rooms go quiet for someone with that kind of pull. I watched 80 people hand him their full attention and thought back to the first time he'd sat at my table on a Thanksgiving evening, working through his 3 careful questions, letting his eyes move over my house like a man adding up figures. "Good evening," Clifford said into the microphone, and his voice spread through my ballroom, as if he'd owned it since the beginning. "Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate a remarkable young man and a new chapter for Bear Creek Summit Lodge." A pause, a smile, the room tilting toward him. I slid my hand into my coat pocket and found the worn cover of Birch's notebook. Then I lifted the dinner menu and let my eyes settle on it. Clifford raised 2 toasts. The first went to Bear Creek Summit Lodge. Its past, its expansion, the road ahead under fresh leadership. He described the resort the way a man describes something he fought for and won. I sat at my table in the rear of my own ballroom, listening to him put a bow on 40 years of my family's labor, as though it had simply materialized the day he came on board. Dottie's hand came to rest on my knee beneath the table. One firm press, then still. The second toast went to Landon, his judgment, his drive, his moment. Landon rose when Clifford lifted his glass, and the room rose with him. And for that 1 minute, my son stood tall, certain, lit from within by 79 people who believed every word, and he was exactly what the room had gathered to see. He found my eyes across all those tables, held them for a half second. Then he was gone back into the room. I raised my glass with the rest. Clifford came for me between the salad and the main course. I'd been tracking him for 10 minutes, table to table, pausing, chatting, angling his way toward me in the unhurried manner of a man who doesn't want it to look like a straight line. He was skilled, no question about that. He folded himself into the chair beside me with the ease of an old friend settling in. "Harwell," he said, laying a leather folder on the table with his palm over it. "Good to see you out tonight. This is Landon's moment." "It is," I said. "Got a small thing to run by you." His tone was easy, conversational, a man doing someone a courtesy. "Just a paperwork matter, something to tighten up the management structure on paper, make Landon's role sit clean going forward." He eased the folder across to me and turned back the first page. "Clean and simple, just needs your name, and we're finished." I looked at it. Then I lifted it and read the first page without hurrying. Then the second. Halfway down the 3rd page I found it, my name in the signature line, Harwell J. Creed. Date field beside it, blank. This document hadn't been drafted tonight. I could read that in the paper itself, the stiffness of it, the exactness of the layout, the work of someone who had done this before and taken their time doing it. Below my name plain as anything, all rights, interests, and ownership. Claims held under Creed Mountain Holdings, LLC, and its subsidiaries, including Bear Creek Summit Lodge, to be transferred in full to Landon Allen Creed and Sella Ann Creed jointly. Jointly, not Landon alone. Sella beside him. I put the folder down and looked at Clifford. "I'll need more time with this," I said. His smile didn't move. "Of course. Take all you need." He rose, ran a hand along his jacket front. "Just don't sit on it too long, Harwell. Tonight's meant to be a celebration. No reason for documents to drag it down." He drifted off toward another table, loose and unhurried for all the world, as though he'd left me a dinner check to initial. I sat there in front of the closed folder and breathed. Dottie leaned in. "What is it?" Everything I said, keeping my voice low. "The whole company, Landon and Sella, both jointly." I turned the folder her direction so she could see the page herself. "Done months back. Already had my name on it." Her exhale came out slow and deliberate. She took the page in for a long moment. Then she raised her eyes to mine. She'd understood all of it. I shut the folder. On the far side of the room, Landon was laughing at something someone had said, one hand resting easy on the back of Selah's chair, looser, more at home than I had seen him in years. Before we go any further, I want you to sit with what's coming, because what I'm about to walk you through is the moment a man realizes exactly what the people around him had been willing to do. Tell me this, if someone you loved turned out to be working against you, would you confront them face to face, or would you let the truth do the talking on its own? Then Clifford touched his arm and murmured something close to his ear, and something shifted in Landon's bearing, a subtle squaring through the shoulders, a tightening of the jaw, the look of a man who has just been reminded of something he has been finding reasons to avoid. He excused himself from the people around him, lifted his champagne glass, and made his way toward our table. My heart did not race. It sank slowly with weight the way something drops when you already knew it was coming and made your peace with it before it arrived. Callum spotted him crossing the room. He set his fork down and sat up straighter. Alma's hand went still against her wine glass. Bryn looked at me, then at her brother, and her face went very composed. Landon stopped at the edge of our table. He stood there a moment, looking down at me with an expression I had not once seen on my son's face. Something between resolve and discomfort. The expression of a man who has constructed a story about what he is doing and is playing it so loudly in his own head that nothing outside it can reach him. Dad. His voice came out pitched too high for the table. Heads nearby turned. Dad, I need your signature on this tonight. It's time. He set his champagne glass on the table, and his hand was not entirely steady when he did it. You've had your run. I don't need you watching over me anymore. This is my career, my future. Sign the paper and let me live my own life. He snatched the folder from in front of me, turned it to the signature page, and held it up toward me. His jaw was hard. His eyes were bright with something that had nothing to do with happiness. Sign it, Dad? His voice climbed another level, and the tables around us went quiet. The quiet spread outward from there like a ripple moving across still water until the nearest third of the room had turned away from their own conversations and was watching ours. You've been dead weight long enough. We're grown. We don't need some maintenance man trailing us around. His voice fractured on those last words, and he covered the crack with more volume. He slapped the folder down on the table in front of me and drove his finger into the signature line. Sign it. You're nothing but a parasite. Always have been. The word hit the room like a stone thrown at glass. Parasite. The music from the speakers ran on for exactly 3 more seconds. Then someone near the board must have caught it because it died away. And what followed was the particular silence of a room in which something has been said that no one is going to be able to unhear. 80 people, no silverware moving, not a glass lifted. I looked at my son standing above me, finger on a signature line, face-flushed hand, still not quite controlled, and something moved through me that was not anger and was not grief, but was something that went back further than either. The specific pain of a man watching the thing he feared most step out of his imagination and into the room in front of him. I looked at the folder on the table. Then I looked up at Landon and reached for it. My hand closed around the folder. Not the pen, the folder. I pulled it to me, opened it to the first page, and began to read aloud. No raised voice. I stayed seated. I read in the same even tone I use going through a maintenance report or checking supply invoices level, unhurried, clear. And the words of that document filled the silent ballroom the way water fills a low place finding every corner. Transfer agreement, I read entered into by Harwell J. Creed, hereinafter the transferring party, and Landon Allen Creed and Selah Ann Creed hereinafter the receiving parties. In consideration of the foregoing, the transferring party agrees to relinquish all ownership rights, interests, and claims pertaining to Creed Mountain Holdings, LLC, including but not limited to Bear Creek Summit Lodge and all associated properties, revenues, and contractual agreements. I looked up. That's me, I said to the room. The transferring party. Everything I own signed over tonight. The color in Landon's face had deepened. Clifford had materialized at the table's edge, positioned slightly behind Landon's right shoulder, and something complicated was working across his features, the controlled expression of a man doing arithmetic on his feet and not liking the numbers. I turned back to the folder and kept reading. Then the chair beside Clifford scraped hard against the floor. Dottie stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. 39 years of marriage had put a register in her that carried further than shouting ever could. The people at the nearby tables caught every syllable without effort. Landon Allen Creed, she said. You will look at me right now. Landon turned. Something in his face when it met his mother's lost its footing, the way a flame dims in a draft. You called your father a parasite, Dottie said, in front of 80 people in a building he owns. Her voice did not shake. It was the steadiest thing in the room. I want you to think carefully about what you just said, and I want you to think about who put that word in your mouth and why. Landon opened his mouth. Dottie raised one hand, not sharp, just final, and he closed it. Callum was on his feet before anyone saw him move. He came around the table fast, and for a moment I thought he would step between Landon and me, but he stopped 2 feet short and turned to face his brother instead. When he spoke, his voice had a rawness. I recognized the voice of someone who has been carrying something too long and has simply run out of space for it. Do you know, Callum said, jaw so tight the words came out clipped, that I have been sending Mom and Dad $800 a month for 6 years. His hands hung at his sides, trembling, not from anger, but from the effort of keeping it caged. 6 years. Landon? Because I thought Dad was struggling. Because I thought he was just a man doing maintenance work, and I didn't want them to go without. He moved 1 step closer to his brother. And you knew more than I ever did. You had access to everything I didn't. And you stood up there tonight and thanked Clifford Breck for giving you your career. You didn't say Dad's name once. Landon stared at his brother. Something shifted behind his eyes, something that looked just for a second like the first edge of understanding. Then Clifford laid a hand on Landon's shoulder, and the moment sealed itself shut. Alma didn't stand up. She reached into her jacket pocket, took out her phone, opened the camera, and pointed it at Landon and Clifford without a word. Put that away, Landon said. Keep going, Alma said. Her voice was flat. Her hand was rock steady. I'm listening. Bryn had already left the table. I hadn't watched her go, but I heard the ballroom door open and then close, and I knew where she'd headed. 2 minutes later, the door swung open again, and she was back phone in hand, and she looked at me across the table with her mother's eyes. He's on his way in, Dad. Arden, I gave her the smallest nod. At the far edge of the table, Clifford straightened. He had finished his recalculation. He stepped forward past Landon and addressed the room with the bearing of a man who has handled difficult moments in front of crowds before and knows how to take the wheel back. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying that practiced warmth. I apologize for this interruption. This is a family matter, and it will be settled privately. He looked at me, and his eyes had gone flat and direct. Harwell, let's not drag this out further than it needs to go. You know as well as I do where this lands. Sign the document tonight and everyone goes home. He reached inside his jacket and produced a pen, extended it across the table toward me. 80 people watching that pen hang in the air between us. I looked at the pen, I looked at the hand holding it. I thought about the settled expression on Clifford's face that first time he heard my name, that small private confirmation, that click of recognition. He had known from the very beginning. 4 years he had been building toward this one room, this one moment, this pen. And he was standing there with the absolute certainty of a man who has never once entertained the thought that the thing he is reaching for might not be there when his hand closes around it. I placed both palms flat on the table. I would like to read the rest of the document, I said. Clifford's jaw moved a fraction. Harwell out loud, I said. To everyone here. The pen remained in the air. Clifford had not moved. And then from somewhere toward the rear of the room, the ballroom door opened one more time, and I caught the sound I had known for 33 years, leather soles moving across hardwood at an unhurried pace. Arden Quill had arrived. Arden Quill walked like a man, with nowhere pressing to be and nothing to establish by getting there. He came through the door without quickening his step, calf leather briefcase in one hand, the other hand loose at his side, and he did not glance at Clifford or Landon or the folder on the table or the pen still suspended between Clifford's fingers. He looked at me. I gave him the smallest nod. He drew out a chair at the nearest empty table, placed his briefcase on the seat, and stood beside it without opening it. Clifford watched him make his way across the room. The pen was still in his hand, and the certainty he had carried into my ballroom was still readable on his face. But beneath it, something had shifted, a tightening around the eyes, a fast recalculation running just behind his expression. He recognized Arden. I had known he would. 8 months digging through Creed Mountain Holdings meant 8 months of turning up Arden Quill's name on every document that mattered. Clifford knew exactly who had just walked through that door. He recovered more quickly than I'd expected. Harwell. His voice came out measured and warm. the professional warmth of a man who has managed difficult rooms for 30 years. He angled himself slightly so the nearby tables could hear, making the moment public, making it seem reasonable. This is a straightforward document. Your son deserves certainty about his future here. A father who loves his son puts his name on that paper and steps back and lets the boy get on with his life. He set the pen on the table in front of me with a small, deliberate click. You have no other choice that makes sense tonight. The room held its breath. Then Willebrecht's chair scraped back from the table. She had been sitting near the front at the VIP table, still through all of it, through Landon's words, through Callum getting to his feet, through Alma and her phone, through every bit of it. Now she rose, and she did not look at her husband. She crossed the ballroom in the manner of a woman who has made a decision that is going to cost her, and has decided the price is one she can pay. She pulled out the empty chair beside Dottie and sat down. Clifford's head turned toward her. "Clifford!" Willa said, not turning to look at him. Her voice was level and carried a tiredness in it, the voice of a woman speaking to something she should have spoken to long ago. "I heard what that boy said to his father. I'm sitting here." Selah's face drained to the color of the white tablecloth. Clifford turned back to me. The warmth in his voice was gone. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was something colder, more businesslike. "Harwell, I have legal documentation supporting this transfer. My attorneys have gone over every line. This is going to happen regardless. The only question is whether it happens tonight with your name on it or in a courtroom next year without it." I picked up the pen. The room tilted forward the way it had been tilting all evening toward what it expected, toward the ending it had already decided on. Landon's shoulders dropped a fraction. Clifford's jaw eased by a degree. At the rear of the room, Walt Ingram's hands went flat on the table in front of him, and every line of his body went still. I held the pen above the signature line. I thought about Birch standing on frozen ground in 1973, looking at nothing and seeing everything. I thought about Landon at 8 years old in the snow, refusing to go inside. I thought about the notebook in my coat pocket with $40 million written in it, and one line beneath it, "Not Birch's land to sell." Then I set the pen down, not signing, just laying it flat on the table parallel to the document. I looked up at Clifford. "I want to hear from my attorney first," I said. Clifford's expression didn't break, but something behind it did, a hairline fracture invisible to most of the room, clear as glass to me. Arden stepped forward from where he'd been standing. He didn't raise his voice. It wasn't necessary. Before any document is executed tonight, Arden said, "I want to clarify the legal standing of what has been placed before Mr. Creed." He opened his briefcase and brought out a single sheet of paper, which he laid on the table alongside the transfer agreement. Under Colorado law, a transfer of ownership in an LLC requires at minimum notarization of the signing party's signature independent legal counsel for the transferring party and full disclosure of the company's current valuation. He looked at the document. This document satisfies none of those requirements. Furthermore, it is being presented to Mr. Creed in a public setting, under evident family and social pressure, following a direct verbal attack on his character. He looked at Clifford. That combination of circumstances constitutes duress under Colorado statute. A document executed under duress is voidable at any time by the signing party. It protects no one. The room held its stillness. Furthermore, Arden continued, his voice unchanged throughout, calm, measured, unhurried. "I have reviewed the document itself. The transfer language is constructed to convey not merely management authority, but full ownership rights. This is not a housekeeping document. It is a transfer of a privately held company valued at—" He glanced down at the sheet in his hand. $94 million current assessment. $94 million. The number moved through the room the way a stone moves through still water. You could watch it travel in the slight shift of heads, the small involuntary corrections of posture, the way the air changed. Landon's champagne glass was still in his hand. He set it down on the nearest surface without looking at where it landed. He was staring at Arden. Clifford's voice dropped, stripped of warmth now entirely. "This is a private family matter. Your involvement, Counselor," Arden said. "I represent Creed Mountain Holdings, LLC. That makes it a professional matter, not a personal one." He held Clifford's gaze with the steady, patient eyes of a man who had spent 33 years standing in rooms very much like this one. "And I believe there are several other things the people in this room ought to know." Mayor Lorinda Foss at the VIP table had set down her water glass. Bowden Chaffee's pen had not moved in 2 minutes. Walt Ingram was watching Clifford with the particular look of a man who has been waiting a very long time to see something unfold. Clifford looked across the table at me. For the first time since he had settled into that chair beside me, with his leather folder and his easy manner, I saw something in his face that was not calculation. It was the look of a man who has just understood that the room he believed he was running was never his to run. "Harwell," he said, "just my name, nothing following it." "Let him finish," I said. Arden did not hurry. He had been practicing law for 33 years, and he understood that the weight of information lay not only in its content, but in how it was delivered in the space you allowed around it, in the silence you let settle afterward so the room could absorb what it had taken in. He stood at the edge of the table with his briefcase open and his papers in order, and spoke the way he always spoke, the way Birch had once taught me, to move snow, not pushing leading. Bear Creek Summit Lodge, he said, was established on land acquired by Birch Clement Creed in 1973. The property was developed over the following 29 years by Birch Creed and his son, Harwell James Creed, working together. In 2002, Birch Creed conveyed the land and all associated structures to Harwell Creed by notarized will, which cleared probate in 2003 without challenge. He set a page on the table beside the transfer agreement, face up the probate stamp, legible from several feet away. In 2005, Harwell Creed formally incorporated Creed Mountain Holdings, LLC, as the operating entity for the property. He has been the sole owner and managing member since the date of incorporation. I watched Landon's face across the table. He was very still. His champagne glass was somewhere behind him, on a surface he had stopped caring about. His eyes were moving between Arden and me, and back to Arden, and I could see the arithmetic beginning to run the arithmetic I had spent 40 years making sure no one could run, now lining up for the first time in an order he had never once considered. In 2015, Arden continued. Harwell Creed hired Clifford William Breck as general manager of Bear Creek Summit Lodge under a standard hospitality management contract. Mr. Breck's role was operational oversight of day-to-day management, staff supervision, and guest services. The contract explicitly excludes any ownership interest or authority to represent the property in transactions. Arden looked at Clifford steadily. Mr. Breck does not own any part of Bear Creek Summit Lodge. He has never owned any part of it. He draws a paycheck from Creed Mountain Holdings, LLC. The man who signs it is sitting right here at this table. That much registered. I could see it reaching Landon, not clean, not all at once the way a clear piece of news arrives and settles, but the way something arrives when your mind pushes back against it and you have to let it circle once before it sticks. His mouth parted. His gaze moved to Clifford. "You work for my father," Landon said. Every layer had been peeled away, the confidence, the bluster, the volume. What remained was barely a voice at all, just the words hollow and adrift. "You have been working for my father this whole time." Clifford offered nothing back. The pen sat untouched on the table. Somewhere near the center of the room, a chair scraped, and a man rose to his feet. I knew who he was, the delegate from Summit Ridge Capital Group, out of Denver, the man Clifford had brought here tonight to watch what was supposed to be a handover of property. He'd made a 4-hour drive from Denver for this occasion. 6 weeks back, he'd put his name on a preliminary letter of intent with Clifford. Now he stood looking across at me with the face of someone whose entire picture of the evening had just been erased. "I'm sorry," he said, and the quiet of the room carried it everywhere. "Did you say Creed Mountain Holdings, meaning Harwell Creed, is the principal?" "He is," Arden said. The Denver man lowered himself back into his seat with great care. His hand went to his jacket, found his phone, and he looked at the screen for a moment before sliding it away again. He glanced toward Clifford. Then his eyes dropped to the table and stayed there. "I made a run at Creed Mountain Holdings back in 2020. He said, barely above a murmur, though every person in the room could hear him. "They turned us down flat. The word I got was that no number would move them." A beat of silence. I never did learn who was running things. He knew now. Bowden Chaffee's pen was going hard, scratching across the notebook, with the kind of urgency that comes when a reporter realizes the story, underneath the story, has just broken open. Mayor Lorinda Foss sat with both palms pressed to the tabletop. Her eyes were on me, and what was in them was something I hadn't seen from an elected official in a good long while, something unguarded, something that edged right up to awe. 12 years of anonymous gifts to the Winter Employment Fund. 12 years of budget entries reading private donor, no name attached. She was doing the arithmetic now, right in front of 80 witnesses. Landon turned toward his father-in-law. When the words finally came, so much had been emptied out of his voice that it barely belonged to him. "Clifford!" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Tell me you didn't know. Tell me you didn't sit across from my father at our Thanksgiving table and ask him 3 easy questions about the lodge and already know everything the whole time that he stopped again. His hand rose and pressed flat over his own chest palm against sternum, like a man checking whether his heart is still beating behind it. "Tell me you didn't know." Clifford held his gaze a long moment. He did not tell him that. What followed wasn't silenced the way an empty room is silent. It was loaded dense with 4 years' worth of shared meals and late conversations, and a promotion handed over, not because anyone believed in Landon, but because he was useful. And there he stood at the center of all of it, one hand over his heart, the blood leaving his face in a way that had nothing to do with whatever was in his glass. Sella reached for his arm. He didn't register it. I studied my son from across that table. The general manager had vanished. The certainty had vanished. What I saw now was someone wearing the look of a man who has just realized the ground under his feet was laid by another hand on a foundation he never once thought to question. And for the first time that whole long evening, I was looking at someone I knew. Arden set one final page on the table. No preamble, no ceremony, just placed it face up under the light and said to me in a low, even tone, "Whenever you're ready, Harwell." I took in the page. Then I let my eyes move around the room. Walt Ingram at his table in the back, Mayor Foss with her palms flat and her gaze wide open, Bowden Chaffee still bent over his notebook, Callum standing with his arms finally quiet at his sides, Alma holding her phone down, Bryn watching me with Dottie's eyes, Dottie sitting upright beside Willa Breck with her hands folded on the table, watching me, the way she'd watched me across 39 years level, sure unbothered by whatever was about to happen next. I got to my feet. 2 hours I'd been in that chair. I rose the way I always do. No rush, no theater, the way a man rises when 68 years have made themselves known in his knees. And he's long since figured out that the things that matter don't need a grand entrance. I tugged my jacket straight. I settled both hands into my pockets. I caught Arden's eye and gave him a small nod, the kind that means, "Go on, wrap it up." Arden turned to the next page in his folder. "There is one additional matter," he said, "that I want to place before everyone in this room." His eyes never went to Clifford. They swept the room instead, across the 80 people who'd arrived tonight, looking forward to a toast and had ended up seated at something they'd still be describing years from now. Mr. Clifford Breck, acting in his role as general manager of Bear Creek Summit Lodge, entered into preliminary negotiations with Summit Ridge Capital Group of Denver, Colorado, with the express purpose of arranging the sale of this property. Arden placed a document on the table, 2 pages stapled the Summit Ridge Capital Group letterhead, showing at the top. A letter of intent was executed 6 weeks ago. Mr. Breck held himself out in those negotiations as possessing the authority to sell. He does not hold that authority. He has never held that authority. The Summit Ridge Capital Group man, still in his chair at his table, in the middle of the room, dragged a hand slowly across his mouth and fixed his stare on the cloth in front of him. Under Colorado law, Arden went on, a general manager who acts beyond the boundaries of his contractual authority in ways that damage his employer's interests constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. The letter of intent with Summit Ridge Capital Group, taken together with the transfer agreement put before Mr. Creed, tonight constitutes a pattern of conduct exposing Mr. Breck to substantial civil liability, including but not limited to damages for tortious interference with business relations and breach of the duty of loyalty. For the first time since he had walked in, Arden looked directly at Clifford. "I will be filing the appropriate paperwork with the Colorado courts first thing Monday morning." The hand Clifford had resting on the back of Landon's chair went motionless. Landon was watching his father-in-law now, with a look I had never once seen cross my son's face. Not fury, not shock. Something deeper than either the expression of a man who has just grasped that he was never the one building anything. He'd been the instrument all along, the tool Clifford required with the handle already angled exactly where it needed to go, and Landon had stepped forward and taken it up with clear eyes and open hands and told himself it was a career. His chest heaved once sharply. "You used me," Landon said. His voice had gone very soft. Soft the way a thing goes right before it fractures. "You sat at my father's table. You shook his hand. You spent 4 years telling me you had faith in me. The muscle in his jaw pulled tight until it flickered under the skin. And the whole time you were running me. Clifford regarded his son-in-law for a beat. One beat only. Something crossed his face, the faint outline of something that might have been an explanation trying to form. Then it dissolved, replaced by the composed, sealed-off look of a man who has spent a career reading the moment a room turns and grasping that, when it does, the only play left is to say nothing. He said nothing. Sella's hand dropped from Landon's arm. She stepped back once, then again, until she was on her own at the table's edge, champagne glass in hand, wearing the particular expression of a woman running rapid calculations about which direction solid ground might lie. I'd been watching my son. Now I watched him lift his hand to his own face, fingertips brushing his jaw, a slow and disoriented little gesture, the move of a man who is searching for his bearings. Then Walt Ingram pushed back his chair at the rear of the room and stood. Walt was not someone who went in for speeches. Over 22 years, I could count on 2 hands the times I'd heard him put more than 4 sentences together. He rose, and the people nearby looked over at him, and he faced the room, and then he faced me, and he said the thing he'd driven here to say. "I have worked for this man for 22 years, Walt said. His voice had no polish to it, rough and direct, the voice of a man who never bothered dressing his words up. I was there the morning he fixed the East Cabin Foundation alone because the crew came up short. I was there the winter the North heating system went out at 2 in the morning, and he was up on that roof in 15 degrees, while every guest in the building was still sleeping. I've watched him work this parking lot 10,000 mornings." He paused. "I've never once heard him mention what he owned, not in 22 years. He let his eyes move across the room. "I just figured the people here tonight deserve to know the kind of man they're dealing with." Then he sat back down. The room held a silence that felt different in texture from any silence before it. Then Arden reached into his briefcase one last time and brought out something I knew the moment I saw it, a photograph 8x10 black and white mounted on cardstock. He placed it on the table where the transfer agreement had been sitting. It was a photograph of Birch Creed taken sometime in the late 70s, standing in the snow on what was clearly raw, undeveloped land. He was holding a shovel, the same shovel that rode in my truck, the one I had carried into the resort every single morning for 21 years. Birch Creed broke the first ground on this property with that shovel in 1973. Arden said Harwell Creed had used it every winter since his father died. That morning, before making the drive here tonight, he'd used it to clear the front walk of this building. He looked out at the room. I thought that was worth knowing. Mayor Lorinda Foss brought a hand to her mouth. Bowden Chaffee had gone, still pen-down eyes on the photograph. I looked at it too. My father in the snow, young and sure of himself, gripping the thing that had made everything possible. Something tightened in my throat that I hadn't seen coming, and I pressed my lips together and let it pass. Then I looked at Landon. He was staring at the photograph. His eyes had gone bright and red at the rims in a way that had nothing to do with what was in his glass, and his hand was pressed flat over his sternum again. I watched my son look at his grandfather, standing in the snow with a shovel, and arrive in a single moment at the full understanding of what he had tried to sign away tonight. His lips moved. Nothing came out. "Dad," he said at last, just that word, nothing behind it. I held my son in my gaze for a long moment. The 40-year-old man standing where the 8-year-old boy used to stand, hand on his chest, eyes spilling over every trace of the general manager gone from his face. I picked up the transfer agreement from the table. I held it up so the room could see it clearly. Then I folded it once, twice, and laid it back down. "This document," I said, "was drawn up without my knowledge and placed before me under conditions that make it legally unenforceable. My attorney has confirmed as much. It will not be signed, not tonight, not on any other night." I looked at Clifford. "Your employment with Creed Mountain Holdings is terminated effective immediately. Mr. Quill has the paperwork." Clifford picked up his leather folder from the table and tucked it under his arm. He looked at me one final time, the look of a man who has played a long, careful game and watched it come apart on the last move. Then he turned and walked toward the ballroom doors without a word. The room watched him go. The door hadn't fully swung shut behind Clifford when the sound began. It rose from the main speakers, a low hum, the kind a system makes when audio is being routed back through the line from a recording. The man at the soundboard in the far corner of the ballroom, a 26-year-old named Chet, who had worked at Bear Creek Summit Lodge for 3 years and whom Walt Ingram had spoken to privately at 4:30 that afternoon, adjusted 2 levels and pressed play. Landon's voice filled the ballroom. Not Landon's voice, as it was now scraped down, red-rimmed the voice of a man watching his certainty dissolve in real time. His voice from 90 minutes earlier, when he had been standing over me at this very table with his finger on the signature line and the performance running at full volume. "Sign it, Dad. You've been a burden long enough. We're grown. We don't need a maintenance man following us around." A pause in the recording, then, "Sign it. You're nothing but a parasite. You always have been." The playback stopped. What came after was the most complete silence I had encountered in a room full of people across my 68 years. Not the silence of shock, the room had moved past shock some time ago. This was the silence of 80 people sitting, with something that had been spoken aloud and could not be recalled, now hearing it a second time, through the sound system of the very building the speaker's father owned. Under Colorado's one-party consent law, any party to a conversation may record it without informing the others. I was party to every exchange that occurred in this room tonight. Walt had made sure the system was running before a single guest arrived. Everything was lawful. Everything was on record. Chet at the soundboard sat motionless, hands resting in his lap. Landon hadn't moved since the recording began. He stood at the table's edge right where he'd been standing when it ended, hands still over his chest, face still wet, mouth open in the way mouths go. When the mind is processing something the body doesn't yet have an expression for. When the last echo of his own voice faded from the speakers, he shut his eyes. His shoulders drew inward and downward, and a sound came out of him. Not a word, something lower and broken, the sound a man makes when he hears himself from the outside for the first time. Sela took another step back. Callum sat down, palms flat on the table, head bent jaw, working the way it does when you are fighting hard not to come apart in front of a room full of people and not quite winning. Alma lowered her phone. She looked at her brother for a long moment, not with the look of someone who had won something, but with the look of someone who had watched the worst thing they imagined actually happen and found it was as bad as they always feared. Her free hand came up and pressed against her lips. Bryn made a sound that was somewhere between a breath and a sob, pressed both hands over her mouth, and looked toward the ceiling, the way you do when you are trying to hold something inside. Mayor Lorinda Foss had both palms on the table, her eyes moving between Landon and me with the steady expression of a woman building something piece by piece in her mind that she knew would stay built for a very long time. Bowden Chaffee was writing again, steady head down, the way reporters write when the story has done all the telling, and their only remaining job is to get it right on paper. I rose from my chair. I had been sitting for most of the evening. I rose the way I always rise, slowly, and I looked around the room at Walt Ingram, at his table in the back, who gave me the same quiet nod he had given me that morning in the parking lot when I told him about the recording setup. At Dottie sitting straight beside Willa Breck, hands folded on the table, eyes on me, carrying 39 years of steadiness. At Callum still bent over his clasped hands. At Alma, her hand over her lips. At Bryn, eyes wet, chin lifted. At Landon, my son was looking at me. The performance was gone. The volume was gone. The borrowed certainty he had been carrying around for 4 years, like a coat cut for somebody else, all of it gone. What remained was the face beneath all that, older than I had kept it in my memory, more worn, and somewhere deep inside it, far back, the beginning of something that might, given enough time and enough honesty, grow into what it needed to become. I had said more tonight than I had planned to. I only needed one thing more. I walked around the table past Arden, who shifted to give me room, past the folded transfer agreement lying on the tablecloth, past the photograph of Birch standing in the snow. I stopped when I was close enough that Landon could hear me without me raising my voice. I did not raise it. "I built this place so you would have somewhere to stand," I said, "not somewhere to stand above me." I held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then I reached for Dottie's hand where she'd already risen to meet me, and the two of us moved toward the ballroom door. Behind us, a chair scraped Callum, then Alma, then Bryn. And from somewhere near the back of the room, a single pair of hands Walt Ingram started clapping, unhurried, at first deliberate in the way Walt approached most things. Another set of hands came in, then more. By the time Dottie and I made it to the door, the sound had built into something I didn't turn around to face because facing it wasn't necessary. It came up through the floorboards, moved through the walls of the building. My father broke ground on, and I spent a lifetime completing, through 68 years of pre-dawn mornings, with cold air and a worn handle, and the quiet, uncomplicated satisfaction of labor that asks only one thing: show up and do it right. I held the door for my wife. We went out into the Ure night together, cold, clear, not a breath of wind. The mountains had gone dark and invisible, but they were there the way they have always been there, the way certain things persist, whether you can make them out or not. I breathed, I slept. Real sleep, the kind I hadn't managed in months. I was beside Dottie at 11:30 and under before midnight. Clean no dreams, the sleep of a man whose body had finally been allowed to put something down. I was awake before 6. Same as always. I got dressed without turning on a light, carried my boots to the bottom of the stairs, and grabbed Birch's shovel from beside the back door. 80 degrees out. A fresh inch had come down overnight, smooth and untouched. The sky was still dark, but threaded at the edges with gray, the kind of dark that tells you dawn is already underway, even when you can't see proof of it yet. I started clearing from the top of the front walk and worked my way down toward the road. Push lift redirect, guide the snow, don't wrestle it. I'd been at it about 20 minutes when I caught the sound of boots in the snow at my back. Walt Ingram was making his way across the lot. Trailing behind him, spread in a rough cluster, were 6 crew members, some of the longest tenured men who had worked Bear Creek Summit Lodge through every season under my watch. Not one of them spoke. They went to the equipment shed, pulled out shovels fanned out across the parking area, and got to work. Nothing more than that. Nothing more needed. At 8:00, Arden sent the termination letter to Clifford Breck. Breach of fiduciary duty, conflict of interest, effective immediately, all company property back within 48 hours. A second letter went out to Clifford's attorney, laying out the civil exposure from the Summit Ridge Capital Group letter of intent. Whether Clifford replied, I couldn't tell you, I didn't look. Arden handled it. Handling it was Arden's job. Landon rang at 9:15, then 9:40, twice more before 11. Every call went to voicemail. I wasn't there yet. I kept the shovel moving. At 10:45, Dottie rang. He sounds like himself, she said. The version from before. I was standing in the middle of the east path, 2 hands on the handle, the cold settled into my cheeks. I'm not ready, I said. I know, she said. I told him you were out working. That evening, the 5 of us ended up in the kitchen well past midnight, Dottie Callum, Alma Bryn, and me. I made beef stew from my mother's recipe. We sat at that table and ate and talked and let the silence come and ate again. Somewhere in the middle of it, Bryn started crying quietly, and Alma drew her in, and Callum topped off everyone's water glass without a word. No one said anything about any of it. We had moved beyond the point where things required naming. Why didn't you tell us? Callum asked. The edge had gone out of his voice. He was just asking now. Not the money, just why didn't you say who you were? I believed I was keeping you safe, I said, from what it does to a person knowing. And now? Alma asked. I reached for my spoon. Now I think Birch had it right and I had it wrong. The day he bought the land, he told me exactly what it was worth. He didn't sit on it until he was 40 years old. Callum let out something close to a laugh. Yeah, he said. Monday morning, Bowden Chaffee's piece ran across the front page of the R.A. Plainsman. The photo he'd snapped at 6 hours in the morning, the one I'd had no idea he was shooting, caught me from behind in my work clothes. Birch's shovel riding on my shoulder, the Bear Creek Summit Lodge main building glowing gold behind me against the early dark. The San Juan Mountains beyond it pushing up into the sky. The caption said, he built it. Every morning he came back and worked it. Not because he had to, because that's who he is. I read it through once at the kitchen table. Over coffee, folded it along its creases and slid it into the drawer, where I put things I intend to keep. 3 months on, I had Birch's shovel hung on the wall of the main office at the resort. The room I'd spent 21 years refusing to call mine. Brass brackets positioned to catch the first of the morning light. No label, no nameplate, no context offered. Walt noticed it the day it went up and dipped his chin once. That was the whole conversation. The civil case against Clifford closed out in March. I wasn't there. Arden managed it. The Summit Ridge Capital Group deal had been dead since the night of the ballroom. Word I got was that the Denver man pulled the letter of intent inside 48 hours, saying something about uncertainty over who actually held the authority to sell. That was all I needed to know. 5 months after the party, a Thursday in April mid-afternoon, my phone rang. Landon. I was in the truck parked in the resort lot engine, idling about to point it toward home. I watched it ring. Twice then, 3 times. On the 4th, I answered. Dad. Careful, quiet. the voice stripped back to something I hadn't heard from him in 4 years. I don't know where to begin. Anywhere, I said, a long pause. Through the glass, the mountains were just beginning to show, that first pale green at the tree line, the color that comes when winter finally starts releasing its grip. Can I come up? He said. Not to go over the resort, not any of that. I'd like to help with whatever you've got going, if you'll have me. I sat with the mountains for a moment. North perimeter fence line, I said. 2 posts want resetting before the frost comes all the way out of the ground. It won't be warm work. I understand that, he said. Bring gloves, I told him. The work kind, not the kind you wear to dinner. Something came across the line, then not quite a word, not quite a breath. I know, Dad, he said. I know, Birch's shovel is on the wall of my office for a reason, not to look at. As a reminder that the costliest error I made in 40 years wasn't a contract that went sideways or somebody I shouldn't have hired. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already know this story isn't really about a resort or a boardroom or a piece of paper on a table. It's about a father who spent a lifetime building something and a son who almost threw it all away without ever knowing what it was worth. I think about what those years cost. The silence. Watching Landon rise through a position he believed he'd earned, never knowing the floor beneath him was laid by his own father's hands. I believe God allows those seasons of hiddenness for a reason, not to shame us, but to reveal what has truly been built when the moment finally comes. What it taught me is that the truth doesn't need your help. It arrives on its own schedule, and when it does, no room is big enough to contain it. If you take anything from this story, from these father stories, the kind that don't get told enough, let it be this. Don't confuse a man's quietness for weakness. The ones who say the least are often holding the most. If someone hands you authority, you didn't earn, ask why. Gifts with strings attached have a way of becoming traps. Build the thing. Let others discover what it is on their own time. The work speaks when you no longer need it to. And if you have a father or a grandfather whose sacrifices you never fully understood, it is not too late to go find out. These grandpa revenge stories exist because some truths are too important to stay buried. If this one stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me what hit you hardest. Share it with someone in your life who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already come join us here at Grandpa's Revenge, there are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.